Today we're in Pennsylvania at Gettysburg National Military Park. Gettysburg. In July of 1863, this peaceful and beautiful town in southern Pennsylvania quickly swelled from 2,400 occupants to almost 200,000. The events that transpired over 3 days would shape the Civil War and American history. With an estimated 51,000 casualties, nearly one-third of all who fought, 7,863 of them being deaths, the battle would be the bloodiest of the Civil War, a war that would claim more American lives than both world wars combined. In May of 2020, my wife and I drove through the entire battlefield, being educated along the way by a narrated recording. We entered with the traditional understanding that we gleaned from textbooks growing up, but we left contemplating the courageous men who fought with an overwhelming weight of grief. We covered much of the 6,000 acres. The roads were clearly marked with auto tour signs. On the 75th anniversary of the battle, President FDR, along with 1,800 veterans who fought in this conflict, dedicated this large monument. It's called the Monument to Peace Eternal, yet at that time, these fields were anything but peaceful. Over 150,000 soldiers engaged in the fierce warfare. Gettysburg was not the first or the last battle in the Civil War. From the first shot that rang out at Fort Sumter, the Confederates from the South had the momentum. Under General Robert E. Lee, the South wanted to finish the war with a decisive victory on Northern soil. General George Meade, the commander of the Union forces, would stake all he had to ensure that that would never happen. But by the end of the first day of fighting, his troops were in retreat, and the day went to the Confederates. By the second day, the Union fortified their position on Cemetery Ridge, forming the center of the famous Fishhook Line. The Confederate staging area was about a mile and a half across the field at Cemetery Ridge. The day was noted for Longstreet's delayed attack on the Union troops, the fight to take the high ground at Little Round Top, which is adjacent to Big Round Top, the fight at Devil's Den, the stream stained red aptly called Bloody Run Creek, and the battle that ceases when night falls, which historians consider a draw. By the third and final day, many buildings in the town were converted into hospitals. There are stories of pews taken apart in churches to make hospital beds. As you approach the decisive battle location on day 3, you drive by the largest monument on the battlefield, the Pennsylvania Memorial. At this point in the conflict, the Confederates, under Lee's directive, would mount an all-or-nothing attack. Picketts Charge, as it is called, would witness 3 Confederate divisions numbering between 12 and 15,000 total men marching toward the Union stronghold. First a cannon barrage for over 2 hours, then men in a line over a mile long and several columns deep marching across the field. While 150 reached the stone wall at the angle, the Union forces ended the Confederate attack. Barely 50% of the attacking men survived. Pickett himself lost 2/3 of his division. General Lee, behind the battle, mounted on his favorite horse Traveler, watched his men being defeated, and understood the Battle of Gettysburg was now over. He is quoted as saying, "It is all my fault. I thought my men were invincible." One day later, on July 4th, he and his army, after suffering a casualty rate of 37%, would depart south of the Potomac, with a wagon trail reported to be 17 miles long. General Meade chose not to pursue him. 4 months later, on November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln arrived in Gettysburg to dedicate this cemetery. He gave his famous 272-word speech, the Gettysburg Address. It began with the following: 407 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty, and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And then it concluded, it is rather for us, the living, we here be dedicated to the great task remaining before us. From these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve these dead shall not have died in vain, that the nation shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth.